Okay, good morning. Welcome to Lincoln University. It's great to see you here today. To introduce myself first, I'm Alan Rennick, a co-director of the Lincoln University Centre of Excellence in Transformative Agribusiness, who are hosting the event today, and introduce Wim de Koning over here, who from B-Link, who is also the co-director of the centre. It's great to see you here today, and we're really delighted to bring this event to you. We're looking at global and local approaches to climate resilient land use, New Zealand's path forward. And sort of the idea for the event sort of emerged in part fortuitously as we had two visitors who wished to come and visit us at Lincoln luckily at the same time. And so we thought, particularly coming from Europe, it would be good to have an indication of what's going on in the OECD countries and across Europe in the area of climate resilience. But also I felt it would be good, in a sense, to highlight some of the thinking that's going on in New Zealand in a sort of reciprocal way, to let them know what's happening here. And there's some fantastic work and ideas that we find in New Zealand. So that's why we've kind of got the idea of the global and local. So hopefully we're going to work through the sort of thinking about some of the issues globally, but really coming down to what it might mean at small scale and local and sort of everything in between in New Zealand. Just talk a little bit about housekeeping first of all. The emergency exits are out the back there and this side here. The toilets are actually at the back of the room. So you go out and straight round and back to the left, you go there. I noticed that we haven't actually provided you refreshments before we start, and I'm slightly nervous because we had to move the first break because of a clash. So by the time refreshments come, you might be rather desperate, and they will be out served out just outside the door here. But hopefully you can control yourselves until they're available in our program. I guess as we're hosting it, we just want to do a bit of self-promotion as well, talk a little bit about the Centre of Excellence in Transformative Agribusiness. It's one of 3 centres of excellence within the university. And our idea really, and why we brought this together, was really thinking about how we might transform the way value is created by agribusiness. And really, I guess it's tackling those wicked problems that we have in the agri-food sector, and how can we increase value whilst reducing the negative impacts of the systems. And we focus really on 4 main areas. We're very interested in alternative energies, and Wim and Shannon here have been very heavily involved in the development of the energy farm here at Lincoln, which we're very proud of, and we're really looking forward to seeing that in operation. We're also interested in alternative proteins. We're working in circular economies, and we're very keen on developing the idea of sustainable food systems as well. So we're working across these areas, and of course, overarching all this is really about sustainable food systems in a way. So just bringing us back to today and making sure we start on time at least and then end up behind. We've really got 3 sessions in the day. So first of all, as we're talking a bit about, we will start thinking about international perspectives on climate resilient land use. We then actually will move to thinking about resilient food systems, small scale and local. And finally, we were thinking about alternative ways of valuing our natural capital and what that might mean for New Zealand. So I'm really delighted with the speakers we got today. I'm really, I guess in part when I was putting this together, I thought, who would I like to listen to? And I've met all these people in various guises since I've been in New Zealand over the last 9 years. Some a little earlier, Ignaciuk, when we met in Cambridge 20 years ago. But I thought it'd be great to have these views put forward for us and to hopefully prompt some thoughts from us and some discussion. It is quite a full program. I'm hoping I know the speakers are very good at speaking. Hopefully they can stick to their 25 minutes each, which will give us 15 minutes at the end of each session to have some discussion and hopefully have some interaction as well. I think the purpose for this really is about sharing knowledge and ideas, and everyone in the room hopefully will have something to contribute. So I think that's plenty from me. The day's not about me, it's about listening to our invited guests. So I really want to move on to our first session on international perspectives on climate resilient land use and introduce our first speaker, Dr. Ignaciuk from the OECD. Now, I feel I know Ada very, very well. Actually, this morning, this is the first time I've met her. I kind of know you through marriage, I think. My wife has worked a lot with Ada over the last 10 years or so, maybe?
More
years, yeah. And so I feel I know her very well. But she is the senior economist policy analysis on climate change and agriculture at the OECD. She had a similar role at the FAO before this, and she's led a lot of work thinking about the economics of climate change and sustainable food production. So I'm really excited to hear her perspective and perhaps to set the overall context of what thinking is in the OECD. I've just changed my other role as IT person now and get this set up.
Yes, hello. It's working. It's working. Good morning, everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be here. And as Alan said, thank you very much, Alan and Anita, for inviting me here. It's really fantastic. It's fantastic to be here. I'm just like, I can't stop smiling. So it's not always, the face you see, but today in the morning, Anita even mentioned that, I'm like really constantly happy. So I'm happy just to be here with you. I'm working, I have actually two hats. One is OECD. I'm right now on my sabbatical, but I've already been to OECD. At the OECD, so it's an Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Some of us out there call it the Rich Club, Countries Club. So that's an organization that works mainly with really well-developed countries. We have around 40 countries, a bit more than 40 countries right now, as members. However, I also have lots of experience working with developing countries because my second hat is FAO, so that's where my primary employer is so far. So I'll be very happy to chat with you about whatever issues that you want to discuss, whether for developing or developed country. However, here I am just to share some experience based on the OECD, so kind of countries alike, New Zealand. And yeah, OECD, I really love motto of the OECD, which is better policies for better lives. And it's exactly what I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk about the policies and how the policies can steer, farmers' behavior, industry behavior, in order to, at the end, hopefully to achieve more sustainable food production. And how I structure a bit my presentation. First, I will talk more about, what can we learn from the past about transformative adaptation. So thinking about, what can we learn from the transformative approaches so far. And then I'll move towards what our countries doing right now. Mainly in the terms of mitigation, because there are lots of goals now, and as you know yourself, the COP doesn't really bring any more, let's say, goals that we would like to achieve. So I think the multilateralism is getting a bit off the track. So countries are more and more interested in thinking what can we do by ourselves in order to achieve emission reductions. And many countries do have targets, and I know that New Zealand has best stringent targets now set for both methane and other greenhouse gases, of which I'll be also speaking a bit later, maybe. So what can we do? How can we learn from the other countries? What do they do? And in order to really kind of think, how can we increase our own resilience, so your own resilience, and reduce emission at the same time. So a few key messages, and then I'll tell you how did we get to that. There are a lot of issues, with trying to think, how can we change our way of producing food, and we went through, really trying to understand, like what would be the possible policy handles in order to support the whole transformative way we really want to go, because it's like practically every country always says, like we really want to transform the food systems, really want to transform how we produce. We want to really be more healthy and sustainable at the end. But before we go through that, we really have to know what are the impediments in order to tackle them before the policies are being set and everybody goes into the same direction. Then with regards to kind of more mitigation approaches, there are very many and very different policy approaches. And even, when coming from FAO, working for every country, going to the OECD, working for a subset of kind of like-minded countries, really make me think that there are no like-minded countries, because every country is so different, context matter. Also, within one country, it might resonate with you with the government changes, things are changing. So it's very good to kind of, think of how to be flexible enough in order to, at the end, still think about, where is our goal and how to get there. So I'll just kind of share a little bit with you, what did we learn on that. And of course, the policy effectiveness change, matters. So we talk always about policies, where do we want to get, but at the end, it always depends where do you apply the policies on. And I have to say, even we're working with that many governments, I have to say that we are not, as the policymakers, we are not really always very good in checking, whether whatever we do really at the end, brings us what we want that it will bring us. So about the first, let me start about the adaptation and kind of more thinking about the kind of transforming, the way we think. It's very hard to pinpoint what is really, transformation, but what we can say, we can't really measure real transformation, but we can see, the different attributes of transformation. So, and transformation for each of us probably is a different concept. So we looked at what has been done in the past, and we tried to look at kind of transformative action through three different kind of domains. One is the depth of transformation. So if we think about low transformation, we think about very little change from the original state. When we think about the kind of high depth, we are thinking about, like really changing completely the arena. So the low level of transformation would be, sowing something in September rather than in October, just because, of particular climate, changes. So this is kind of a very small departure from the, from the kind of base that we had, going to much more higher depth of, for instance, completely changing the system, moving the wine production from France to the UK. That may happen, in the future. That would be really a kind of a big transformation. Painful for the French, probably happy for the UK people. But this is something that actually it is discussed right now also at the EU level. Because of the changes in climate. Then we looked at the breadth of the changes. So whether or not this would affect just, I don't know, a small farm, a small group of farms, or whether this will be kind of an action being taken across the country. So that's from low to high. Small units of affected people towards much higher level of the breadth. And of course the speed, so whether something happens quickly, or whether things are happening through decades of longer. So that's also an important aspect of when we think about kind of transformation actions. So we did we did a review of different transformative actions, and we tried to place them across those three different dimensions. And what we find out is that, with time, so, there was a review being done relatively recently, but we looked at all sorts of actions. And there was a lot of action that had relatively deep, that was relatively high in depth and breadth. So something that, people could see that this is really changing. So like changing completely the landscape from more natural to really rural. So changes, of the natural environment to kind of agricultural environment. However, with a very low speed. So changes were, when we go back, we are thinking, changes were happening. Big changes were happening, but they were very kind of slow and, step-by-step changes. However, there are very few actions that we find out that were really, high in depth, breadth, and speed. And the only one kind of transformation that we could see from from the OECD countries that really we would attribute all of those dimensions to was the change of the water supply in Israel. So the desalinization of water in agriculture, that's kind of very high-tech technology that really happened relatively quickly in time and changed a lot, how the Israeli are actually producing now agricultural goods. So it's very important to think, of those aspects. But what was more interesting for us actually to look at is to really think, how can we assess the policy making in thinking, what are the potential impediments to making those big transformations? So of course, the best thing, the best big stuff, coming up was always uncertainty and risk aversion. And when you think about risk aversion, it's not only the risk aversion of people, but also for policymakers, because people don't want to, do changes if they don't know what's going to happen at the end. So there is, and everybody's kind of looking a little bit at each other, what the others are doing, and I would say, the risk aversion often is being, put as a negative thing. On the other hand, you can also think that sometimes you never know whether it's better to wait and see what's going to happen and then act, or whether, to act and in hope that things are going to change. But this is something that also, it resonates a lot with the government. When I was discussing this particular aspects of the government, they were saying it's indeed, we don't know exactly what should we do, because if we say something and something else happens, then we have a lot of protests and, farmers on the streets and all those type of things, which I'm not so sure that you are having this here in New Zealand, but at least in Europe, it's very, very, let's say, topical, to have farmers on the streets and them being very unhappy about what is happening. So we are very vocal. But then when you think about the individual level, how to actually trigger people to do good things by themselves, because that's what we all at the end want, right? We don't really want to have the policymaker, going there and saying, you should do this or that, but kind of making sure that people do the good thing. And then we looked at what were the kind of the big impediments of them, and it's not anymore the fact that people deny climate change. I think there was practically no one who says that, we don't believe in climate change. But what people are still not very comfortable with are the big changes. So they say, okay, well, it happens, maybe I will have more rain or less rain, but this big change, no. I mean, I don't trust, those big changes. So there is still a kind of a barrier of really thinking about this big transformation. People are much more comfortable with these little changes, and they are okay that there is a change, but nothing dramatic, please, So that was kind of like how farmers generally kind of behave with us. Of course, there's the resistance to change. So like if I don't know, my father did it, I also do that on the step of kind of something that I'm sure you are very familiar with. One thing that was very interesting for us to realize is that how social control really matters. So when we look at those farmers, those producers who really managed to do a big transformative action, they really went beyond, what was normal. Those guys are usually not the ones that are the most settled in the communities. Those are the ones that are the outsiders. Those are the ones that go to the communities. They decide, okay, now I want to become a farmer. I'm going to buy the farm there, and I'm changing completely. When it's really interesting for us to realize that, those ones with very strong social connections, the established people we know in the established communities, those are very good in making, those are very good to be addressed by making small changes. So you say, okay, this maybe, you can have a change on the margin here or something, and then that is is going to work. But if you think about the transformative action, you need to approach very different set of people. Those ones who are really like not too much worried about risk, not too much worried about what the neighbor will say. And apparently what the neighbor will say really matters in order what people are doing. And of course, like resources, but this is resource constraints also matters, but this is of course something that everybody knows from their own little even household level of budgeting, right? So at the institutional level, many policymakers like to what they have already, right? So, I mean, there are changes sometimes, of course, depending on, when there is a change of the government, that changes. But within a certain government, people also like what they know. There are already a lot of policies that favor particular behavior. So I know that in New Zealand you don't really have that much here direct support for farmers, but there's in many other OECD countries we have direct support for farmers to produce certain goods or to behave in a certain way, and that's kind of get you stuck in particular behavior. Thinking also about insurance, sometimes insurance set up certain let's say expectations what you are supposed to do. So you are also stuck in a particular behavior. So there are some institutional barriers to really making a big transformative change. That's something what resonates maybe with you, the long-term funding, research funding. There seems to be really a big issue on that. It's too much of variability of where the funds are going to be placed, and despite the fact that we know that research and development is really important in order to drive the change, somehow the funding for that is not always, let's say, very mainstreamed or aligned. So, and I'm not going to even mention the institutional misalignment. It's like really right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing in practically most of the countries I've seen. So it's very interesting to see. So now let's move a little bit more on what to do when you have already you agreed already internally to a target of emission reduction, and when something changes and then they might not be really achievable anymore with the tools that were available at stake. So what we did, we take stock of different mitigation actions across all OECD countries and main G20 economies, and we constructed a database of the policies that are being right now available to different countries for the whole land use sector, so agriculture, forestry, and other land use sectors. This is something, if you are interested, you can just very quickly, have a look at how this look like. And we tried to really understand, and this was really a very good learning experience for many countries. This is a very kind of fresh work that we have been doing. And it was very interesting, the feedback that I've received on this work, because we asked, we work a lot with different countries directly, and they were saying to me sometimes that this is the first time they really realized what do they do, looking at that and seeing this, what happens. Or this is the first time I see, what the other countries is doing, which is really great, because I can maybe check whether we can learn from them and see, whether we can follow up on similar approach. So that was I got a lot of feedback on that in terms of actually peer learning, which I think this is already something that that is super appreciated. So this is still a graph that shows like how we organize those actions. So as I said before, we are policy-oriented organization. So we classified all of those policies across 3 different kind of main categories. which were economic instruments, other instruments, and regulatory instruments. So the economic instrument, this pie changes a lot when I show it for all the database so far, or whether I show it for different countries. There are countries for which, the economic instrument, and especially subsidies, are kind of like, you can see almost the whole pie is blue. I looked at very quickly at New Zealand, and obviously, the use of policy, a regulatory instrument and other instrument is bigger than the subsidies. There's very kind of few subsidies relative to the other instruments that is being utilized here in OECD. However, it's also good to see, like what the others are doing and how they try to stimulate emission reductions based, of what they do. But it's very interesting to look at how countries are doing that. So. Just another representation of what, how countries try to, what kind of policies they use by trying to, like also target particular gases. So I think here you have the targets also for methane. So it might be very interesting also to see immediately what kind of other policies are being done in order to reduce the methane emissions. So we try to, assign the gases to each of the policies that we have, and you can see that there are many of them. Through many of them, you can directly reduce like methane or N2O. Some of them you can reduce also the energy, like when you think about the buildings and optimize fuel use. And of course, there's more and more policies that are really trying to reduce a kind of a set of greenhouse gases, but through different, land management, of land conservation measures, which reduces a big packet of greenhouse gases. However, you can't really just assign one of them individually. But yeah, land management was something that is really highly important on the policy agenda, because that's how very often countries try to kind of steer the behaviors of farmers. But the policies do not really tell you, the effectiveness. So you can have like hundreds of policies which are maybe potentially ineffective. You can have one policy which is fantastic and effective. So that's also, one needs to be really careful with, looking at how much of a country, produces, the different policies versus, whether or not they're effective. So we did also a kind of a review of which type of policies are actually really indeed effective in reducing emissions. Those ones are the policies that should be, they are kind of ticked as by governments as policies that do reduce emissions. But as you could see, like when you think about, subsidies of taxes, I mean, trading systems are so tiny right now. And I have to say that we are very disappointed. I mean, from the point of peer learning, that your approach to the trading system by including agriculture is not happening right now, because every country was so interested in how New Zealand is going to take up this approach, and everybody was like very like, oh, can we invite New Zealand to talk? But I think, as I imagine, situation has changed. So, yeah, we can't really learn from you on that. But I have to admit that there was a lot of interest on your approaches. So prior to actually setting up the trading system, we had a lot of discussions with New Zealand to really understand, how do you manage that, because it's really hard. Anyway, I diversed. Sorry, I was. Anyway, looking at the subsidies, there's a lot of money being given to the agricultural sector in the form of different subsidies. However, we know that many of the subsidies are kind of being set up by to achieve a different than environmental benefits. Let's put it in this way. So on average, the subsidies, and again, this is the subset of the instruments that governments are using to reduce emissions. So within this, you could see the subsidies are effective, but not really very much. They were kind of like, they do reduce, but that's not really, the way to make this big, emission reductions that might be, might be really as a kind of a goal of the governments. Similarly, with taxes, there's also very little information on taxes. The agriculture is not really being taxed in any countries. Right now, we have Denmark that is putting a tax on agricultural emissions. However, the tax is going to be set up in 5 years probably. But they are already working on it, like actually how to tax the emissions. Again, this is another big hype now. Everybody wants to learn from Denmark on how to actually do that. And every time I'm talking to the Danish to the Danish policymakers, they're always talking to me about all these different trade-offs, how the social aspects really matter in order how you have to approach it, how do you really how the government took a decision on how they want to see the agriculture at the end, because by setting such a system, something has to give. I hope it's fine. I hope it's not in a kind of based on my Danish experience story. It's not as dramatic. I mean, a few farmers may be out of business, but still majority will stay. So going back to the thing, the big thing. The big thing that really kind of, turns out to be really working in terms of reducing emissions are actually actions not to do much. Just don't deforest, don't change your wetlands, don't dry your wetlands, don't dry your peatlands. So all of this type of which we would then call, framework regulation. There was a lot of zoning policy. So don't touch what is already, there, and it's already stored a lot of carbon. And try to, invest in setting land aside and doing some biodiversity, actions on the land. So those were the actions that were really, at the end, very positive on environment. And again, one need to think how positive they are from the social perspective. The another one that is working pretty well are all these government investments, and that is a lot of R&Ds, of course, that is expected to yield a lot of emission reductions. And when we think about the technology standards, that was based mainly on the predictive studies on how much all those new technologies may potentially reduce emissions. But this is, of course, this is not really based of experience, past experience. So it's all about what the models and so assess how they're going to happen. So I'm just looking whether I'm not too far out of my time. So yeah, what is the path forward? I would believe that for every government, they really need to, and every community, they really need to know where do they want to go at the end, because that's really important to know what is your goal, what is the end point, what you want to achieve. Once you know that, you need to really think about what are all the barriers in order to get you on a different path than the path that you want to stay. And only when you start to really think about how you have to maneuver yourself, then you can set the actions and stimulate people and stimulate the communities to align, on the same path. With regards to mitigation policies and how can we use land not only for food production, which is obviously the priority of all of us, right? How can we actually make sure that the right set of policies for the right set of conditions and countries and people are being developed? And we have different examples, so it's always good to do this peer learning and see what is working, what is not. And here I really hope you will go one day with the ETS, because we are also curious. And then of course at the end you really have to learn, evaluate, and then learn and evaluate and learn, because often we and I don't want to sound negative, but sometimes, like it looks like we are a little bit like in the mist, doing something without learning from what we are doing. We are repeating the same actions, which does not always have to, yield what we want them to yield. So with that, thank you very much. And I think at the end there will be probably a time for questions, right, Alan? So I'll give this to you.
Thanks.